Hey gang, on the bench today I've got a Republic guitar, which is a nice little small-bodied Resonator guitar. The customer who purchased it, notice there's a little bit of a crack here on the back of the neck, sort of adjacent to where the truss rod cavity is on one side, and there's a bit of a bulge on the other. Don't know what that's from. Could just be shipping something in the winter, things got cold and shrunk, maybe the truss rod was a little bit too tight, formed a little crack, so we got to take care of that. I don't think it took a hit or anything, although there's a little dent in the back of the headstock here, but this just looks like, you know, could have been a weak piece of wood, who knows. So we're going to do that and a few other things. We're going to install some strap buttons. This customer likes to have the strap button on the side of the instrument rather than into the heel. So I think you've seen me do that before. I've got to put a little plug on the inside so that I've got something to screw into. And we're going to install one of these lace ultra slim acoustic pickups, which work great for Resonator guitars. They go up here on the end of the fingerboard. In this case we're going to run the wire in through the F hole there because we're not sure if this is going to be a forever home for this pickup. And then run the wire on the inside of the body. It's going to come out somewhere near the block. And we're also going to ground the strings and all of the metal components as well at the same time that we do that. So this should be a relatively simple repair. So we'll start off by removing the cover plate and having a look at that biscuit and cone. They seem like the standard National style. Being very gentle when we remove that. You have to be careful. These are very delicate pieces of metal. The inside looks pretty clean. No surprises. That's good. So I started by taking off the tension on the truss rod. It was very, very tight. And I'm filling the crack, starting off with some thin viscosity super glue, and I'll follow it up with some of the thick stuff to fill in the void. You can see I've put some wax around the crack to make cleanup easier. Work proceeds on the strap buttons. I'm just drilling a hole here equidistant between the binding. This is the wooden cleat I made that will give support to the screw that gets glued against the side using that bead on a string. It gets pulled in tight. I had to nip off the jack so I could fish the wire in through the body. Just reattached all the wires, and also another wire to ground the tailpiece. Goes in a hole I drilled. We'll get that all snugged up. There's the grounding wire that just gets bent over and the tailpiece makes contact with it, grounding the strings and everything. When I put on a pickup like this, I like to make sure it's centered with the fingerboard, so I actually do measure. And the pickup itself gets adhered to the face of the guitar using some really sticky self-adhesive pads. So you need to be careful when you stick it down. On the inside, the wire is held tight to the side using some little clips. This was surprising. Part of the sound well under support was loose, so I went back and re-glued that, clamped it in place. The binding on this was extremely sharp, so I spent some time with a razor and some sandpaper to give it a nice radius and make it more friendly for your arm. On the frets, there was apparently some buzzing, and I could see there was a hump at the body joint, so I had to go back and level that and recrown and polish those up. Before removing the biscuit, I like to mark its location relative to the front of the guitar, so I know exactly where it goes back in place. Just removing the screw. Once again, being really careful when working with these cones here. You don't want to damage them. And the biscuit pops free. There was actually a little crack, a hairline fracture on the front side of the biscuit, so I put some glue in there to stabilize it, make sure it didn't get any farther. And here's the saddle that comes out. I'm going to make a saddle with wider spacing and a little higher than this one. It's actually pretty narrow as these things go. So I went back and scraped the super glue fill level, polished it up. That blends in pretty nicely, and it'll look better once we've actually polished all the wax off it. Here I am widening the saddle so it's more in line with the standard 130 thousandths that you find on most Nationals. And I'm plotting out how wide I can actually make the string spacing. This guitar came with 50 millimeters or 2 inches, which is really narrow. In the end, I think I got 55 millimeters out of it. Much more comfortable for a finger picker. And also the slots in the nut were, well, they were generous. They didn't take them down very far, so I deepened those and got better nut action. There we go, all set up and ready to put the cover back on.